So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Amy Kazamerchik, and I'm the curator of the Audain Gallery and of Cathy Busby's project We Call, which has been installed in the Teck Gallery next to us since May 20th, 2017, and will close on June 8th, 2018. I'd like to acknowledge that this exhibition, the work that went into it, and the processes that emerged from it took place on the ancestral and living unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. 4 days ago, on Monday, April 16th, a press conference was held in this room with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, Burnaby Mayor Derek Corrigan, Tsleil-Waututh Elder Ta'a Amy George, NDP MP Kennedy Stewart, and Vancouver Councillor Andrea Reimer in opposition to the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which is planned to pass through Burnaby Mountain, on which SFU resides. And so I also want to acknowledge all the commitment and care that is being expressed towards protecting the mountain, where we also engage our work at this university. We're together tonight to reflect on We Call's year-long installation and its parallel installation at the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society in Hazelton, BC, which Cathy will introduce shortly. The first inkling of this project emerged in January 2016 at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Gallery at Concordia University in Montreal. I was working on a No Reading After the Internet project with Cheyenne Turians and Alex Muir in collaboration with Erica Violet Lee, Joseph Murdoch Flowers, Zoe Todd, and Chelsea Vowell, who created the project #ReadTheTRC Report, a YouTube channel featuring individuals reading segments of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee of Canada's summary of the final report. They conceived of this project to make the 536-page legal document accessible to people through a media form that could be listened to and critically responded to through its reading. In a series of events we presented together, we discussed our sense of shared responsibility to keep the work that had been done by the Commission and all of the contributing survivors and witnesses visible, material, and active, to keep this history and its living imprint from becoming a page turned or chapter closed. Since 2008, Cathy Busby has been making text-based installations and printed matter that make visible and public, for continued observation, reflection, and critique, texts that reveal how the Canadian government persists in obfuscating their accountability towards Indigenous rights and title. From 2008 to 2010, she produced We Are Sorry, large-scale text installations of excerpts from the 2008 landmark apologies to Aboriginal peoples made by Prime Minister Stephen Harper for the Canadian Indian Residential School System and by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd for the Australian Stolen Generations. In 2010, this work was invited to be installed at the Winnipeg Art Gallery for the inauguration of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In 2012, Cathy followed this project with budget cuts, a billboard produced with AKA Gallery and Paved Arts in Saskatoon, which was composed of a list of Aboriginal organizations in Canada whose budgets had been severely cut since the 2008 apology, exposing the limits of the apology's sincerity. In 2014, Cut and Muzzled was published in the Capilano Review and continued a list of headlines announcing budget cuts across the country between February and March 2014. In June 2014, Kwakwaka'wakw artist Chief Bo Dick, along with 21 collaborators, set out from the University of British Columbia to Ottawa on a journey they called Awalaskenes 2, Journey of Truth and Unity, to challenge elected officials to attend to the relationship between the federal government and First Nations people. On July 27, 2014, Dick and his group performed a copper-breaking ceremony to shame the government on the steps of the Federal Parliament building in Ottawa, on top of Cathy's We Are Sorry vinyl banner. In 2016, a replica of this banner was included in the Lelecanis All Directions Journey of Truth and Unity exhibition at the Morris and Helen Belkin Gallery. Also in 2016, Cathy produced Taking Up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Calls to Action, a text-based work for C Magazine that draws from online headlines citing organizations that express support for the TRC's calls to action when it was first released. Thinking along with Cathy's practice of close reading, I approached her to work on a site-specific installation that made the calls to action visible within SFU. Together, we selected calls that address post-secondary education institutions and their governing and funding bodies, as well as cultural organizations and their governing and funding bodies. We wanted to draw attention to how the she wanted to draw attention to how the addressee of each call, we, highlights the collective, multiple, overlapping, divergent communities that must now critically take up what the Commission has put forward, and the gestures of speech and action that catalyze a call. Installed in one of the busiest, most public and shared facility in the Harbour Centre campus, We Call invites the university's administration, faculty, staff, and students into the roles of both calling for and being called on. This work was an invitation and an instigation for SFU galleries to consider what it means to both call for and be called upon. Following its opening, Cathy and I began researching SFU staff and faculty who were taking up the values of the calls to action in their curriculum, pedagogy, and departmental structures. I want to thank William Lindsay in the Office for Aboriginal Peoples, Brenda Morrison in Criminology and the Center for Restorative Justice, Veselin Junjic in Mathematics, Jeffrey Redding in Health Sciences, Marcia Guno and June Scudeler at the Indigenous Student Center, and Annie Ross in the First Nations Studies Department for sharing their questions, experiences, concerns, and lessons with us. We began these meetings with the impetus to convene workshops between SFU galleries and other disciplines. However, as our research and conversations expanded, we realized there were many concentric and diverging conversations happening that we did not have the experience nor the resources to participate in sincerely. In the same year, SFU's Aboriginal Reconciliation Council organized swiftly towards developing a set of recommendations for how SFU's commitment of $9 million could be used to address the calls to action focused on post-secondary education. We were both surprised at the level of discourse and action that was already happening amongst faculty and staff, and simultaneously overwhelmed by the complexity of the bureaucratic order that governs the structure and operations of the university. In reflection, we decided to look inward to SFU galleries as a world within worlds, to think deeply and critically about how we could structurally and formally position our we. I'm going to invite and welcome Cathy Busby to the podium to expand further upon her work, and I'll return shortly with the other guests for the evening to address some of the questions and challenges that emerged through our working process together. So thank you for coming. There you go. I'm just there when you're ready.
Hello, everybody. So pleased to be at this moment. So pleased to be able to speak with you tonight. I've been directed to stay behind the podium because this is being taped. So, I also wanted to acknowledge the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people on which we meet here tonight. And I want to voice support for the Indigenous-led opposition to the Kinder Morgan pipeline that threatens their land and water rights. I'm grateful to Amy Kazimirchuk for inviting me to do this work and for all the heavy lifting she's done to weave it into the institution. I'm also grateful to Director Melanie O'Brien for her quiet and steadfast backing. Finally, I'm grateful to the Canada Council for the individual grant that supported this project, specifically the version in Hazelton. So the purpose of this work here at SFU, as well as the version that I'm going to show shortly that was done at the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society in Hazelton, was to amplify the presence of the calls to action as produced by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Many of you have probably seen this document, the calls to action, this 94 item, 94 calls. It's very dense and demanding, really, takes some commitment to get through and to kind of make sense of. And what I wanted the work was to accomplish was to bring a version of that was able, that would provoke an interest in people to think about what was being said, and perhaps more importantly, the spirit of what was being said in those calls about nation-to-nation relations. So this is the other wall that you've probably all seen just outside here and where we're going to have the reception, but I just wanted to refresh your memories of what's there. The selection of the calls was made in thinking about SFU and its relationship. It's as a post-secondary education institution, thinking about the calls that seemed most relevant to this setting. My work is always site-specific, and so this was to be no exception to that. I also worked to fill every little bit of space that was part of the walls available. So you can see it's a wall-to-wall work and very intentionally planned. And while I'm at it, I'd just like to thank Patrick O'Neill, who did the layout, who's here tonight, and who's worked closely with me on a number of my text works now, helping to make them fit into these spaces sort of just right as they can be. So I wanted to give you a little bit of sense of the process of making the work. I wanted to reveal it for you, that basically it's a lot of measuring and then painting, and then it's vinyl that is applied afterwards. And sometimes I apply the vinyl myself, and sometimes, as in the case at SFU, some people who do it for a living come in and do it. So that's what happened here. Integral to this work, as I see it, is having a takeaway folder for the viewer and or the visitor, I should say. And in this one, what's presented is the entire calls. So where the calls are abbreviated, and sometimes in my mind, I've abridged them, so I've made them so that they are relatively easily digestible at a quick read. But what you lose with that is the detail that's been put into the full calls. So it seemed important to me to provide the full calls for the reader. And and something for people to take away. We also created these fabric banners as a way to, when we had our advisory council meetings that we were referring to, so that we would have this sort of sense of enclosure and presence of the calls to action. These are polyduck fabric, a lightweight fabric, the same fabric that I used at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and they're hung by Velcro, so they're like Insta art. It sort of created the setting in a, and we had our meetings with our dinners and our conversations in the midst of these, and I just wanted to show how they just kind of go up and come down. very different from the paint and vinyl. And now looking at GWES. So yeah, I'm grateful to the late Marjorie Mccrea, GWES's founder and director until her untimely passing in 2016. She was an enthusiastic backer of this project, and I'm also grateful to the staff and students and community members in the Hazeltons for supporting this project. And this is the launch of it in December of 2017. And you can see that there were community members as well as students and staff in attendance, and I hadn't planned that there would be a launch, or I just planned that I would do the work. That was as far as I got. And the community picked it up and said, well, we've got to have a launch, and we'll have a lunch, and we'll invite everybody, and it all kind of came together around me, I was just finishing off putting up the vinyl. So this is what that space looked like before. And thanks to the hard work of a number of people, it was transformed. And again, I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of that transformation. These pictures were taken with my iPod, not great quality, but I thought worth giving you the idea anyway. So gradually constructing the work over a period of about a week. And it was very important that the calls to action here worked with that setting, and very different from SFU and what would be important, although there were some overlaps in the selection of calls. But what we have here on the right-hand side is really a big picture call. We call upon the Government of Canada to develop with Aboriginal peoples a royal proclamation of reconciliation, building on the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and the Treaty of Niagara of 1764, reaffirming the nation-to-nation relationship between Aboriginal peoples and the Crown. And then the proclamation would commit to adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, renew or establish treaty relationships based on principles of mutual recognition, respect, and shared responsibility, reconcile Aboriginal and Crown constitutional orders to ensure that Aboriginal peoples are full partners in Confederation, including integration of Indigenous laws and legal traditions in negotiation and implementation of treaties, land claims, and other agreements. So this is a big picture, aspirational. And then on the other wall about the need for consultation and free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before proceeding with economic development projects. So when I talked to Kirsten Barnes, who's going to be our next speaker, about this selection of putting these calls on these walls, she said, oh, they're like house posts, because this is where people are coming and going into the building, but they also are very grounding in terms of big picture aspirational needs. And then as you go into the building, first there's the call on governments to implement community alternatives to imprisonment for Aboriginal offenders and to respond to underlying causes. And it's interesting that actually GWES has been working in this direction, had been up until the funding cut that it experienced in 2013, through youth programs offering alternatives to imprisonment. For about 20 years had a program running connected with GWES where many of the people in it would attend GWES. So it was interesting also I felt important to affirm what's already going on. And that was similar with some of the calls that are here as well. There's so much good work going on, and it was affirming. And this one about the calling upon governments to reduce the number of Aboriginal children in care. To me, it was interesting to use space that is normally neglected space. So this is just a little bit of space that's above the lockers, but it was a nice long space. And so I really liked the idea of enlivening those spaces. I was a little bit nervous, and when the show actually, or when the work actually opened, I was concerned that I just hoped that I hadn't overoccupied, taken up too much space. And I wanted to honor the work also that was done by Dave, and in the background, Cathy Clay, in helping with the painting and helping with the whole installation. Really, it was really great to have that community involvement. The final call. So there were 5 wall text paintings done within the school, and the final call. Calling on the federal government to develop with Aboriginal groups a joint strategy to eliminate educational and employment gaps between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. This call was especially meant to honor Marjorie Mccrea, who I previously mentioned, because of her long-time commitment to this goal. And this is in the administrative hall. You can kind of see of the school. So down that hall, as you look down on the right-hand side, you can't see it in the photo, but are the 2 locker wall text paintings. And then as you go around the corner at the end, if you turned left at the corner, then you would see the other 2 house post paintings. And so this one is also a kind of legend saying, from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, and thinking on anybody who's interested could then, easily Google that and find out what it was if they didn't know. And then the last line says, "We call was made with support of the Canada Council for the Arts." And so I just spoke and probably missed a few things from my notes. But there's lots of room for that in terms of questions and answers that people might have at the end. So what I'd like to do now is introduce June Schuler, who's the next woman up. And I first met June in 2017 when she agreed to meet with myself and Amy. She was the Indigenous Graduate Student Coordinator out of the Maggie Benston Student Services Center. She was also doing some programming with Marcia Guno in the Indigenous Student Center. Following our meeting, she was invited by the gallery to be the Shadbolt Fellow, cross-appointed with SFU Galleries and SFU's First Nation Studies. A Métis scholar, she received a BA and MA in English at SFU and her PhD in English from UBC. Her research examines the intersections between queer Indigenous studies, Indigenous literature, film, and art. June's current project explores Indigenous Gothic and horror and science fiction film and literature. Inspired by a love of Indigenous arts, she is the co-chair of the Vancouver Indigenous Media Art Festival Society and co-editor of Studies in American Indian Literatures. So please join me in welcoming June.
Thank you, Cathy. The whole time I was like, don't trip over the water, don't trip over the water. Danse Kiowa, June Schuler, Nia Tegassan, the Chapanak, Red River, Manitoba, Batoche, Saskatchewan, Egua, Castelfranco, Veneto, Oceania, Italy. My maternal ancestors come from Red River, which is now Winnipeg, from Batoche, Saskatchewan. My dad's Italian. And I'd like to acknowledge and honor that we're on Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. So, and thanks for coming. So, what I did, so talking to, out of the advisory committee meetings, let's see, where's my PowerPoint? We thought, how can we kind of make the SFU gallery on the mountain more like accessible to students and encourage students, especially Indigenous students, to come to the gallery. So, well, the gallery is kind of a research center right now without any long-term like stuff on the wall. So we thought, well, let's have a film class in there. So it was an amazing experiment. So what we did is so the class ran from 2:30 to 5:30. So at 2 o'clock we had soup and bannock, which was supplied by Cedar Feast House Catering from Squatch Lodge. So people could come, it was open to the public, they could come for soup and bannock, stay for the film at 2:30. And then at 4 o'clock, 4-ish, there was a break, and then the public would leave, and then we would have our class. So yeah, it was an experiment, and most of the students had never been into the gallery. There was about 23 students. I'd say about 10 were Indigenous. And so it was great. Melanie explained, what a gallery is, because most of them hadn't been to a gallery. And it was really interesting. I was thinking about the first time we had a talking circle and, talked about, I asked them, what is Indigenous films? Like, name 3 of your favorite films and an Indigenous film if you can. And most of them couldn't, or they said Smoke Signals. So that's kind of the only one. And a couple Indigenous students knew more films than that. And at the end of it, the last class, one of them said, well, I thought, we went around and I said, what was your favorite film and what was your least favorite film? And they loved all the films. And somebody said, I thought it was going to be watching Smoke Signals and Dreamcatcher, which is a terrible 80s horror movie. So it was so exciting for the students to see themselves on film. It was, they were just really excited. So, and I was lucky, we brought in 3 Indigenous women filmmakers to give a talk. So we had Ella Maya Tailfeathers, and I thought it was really important to situate ourselves in our traditional territory. So she did The City Before the City, which is about the Musqueam fight around the Marpole Midden. And it was really exciting for the students. They were kind of shy, and then they kind of got the hang of it and asked some really good questions. And then unfortunately, I was sick during this class, but I had Jules Kustishin come in. She's a Cree filmmaker. And if you go to the APTN website, you can see her series called ASCII Boys, where she has her 2 older sons going to different reserves and kind of connecting to culture. So that was really great to have students see like Indigenous filmmakers, which, they don't usually get exposed to. Oh, there's me. I'm talking about horror, so I did Jeff Barnaby's Rhymes for Young Ghouls, and one thing about the class was trying to figure out, because there was a lot of Indigenous students, and some of the films were difficult, so trying to kind of figure out how to negotiate that. So if anybody's seen Rhymes for Young Ghoul, it's a horror film about residential school, so I decided to make it optional, because it was going to be really hard for students. But one of my students, who's Blackfoot, actually came and took a couple of other students to the Indigenous Student Center to do smudging after the film. So we really tried to incorporate that. And it was kind of great. We had that's Kai White, who's doing their PhD at SFU and teaches at Capilano University, and they were doing a queer film class, so they came. She brought like 25 of her students to join our class when we were talking about queer Indigenous films. So that was kind of cool. And so this is our last class. We had cake, and Matt, one of the students on the left, brought the powwow drums. We had powwow drumming, and it was really amazing. So this was also an experiment in what I'm calling kitchen table pedagogy. So the idea that you're sitting around a kitchen table, everybody's equal, and trying to, it's really hard because, there's so much hierarchy in the university, and I do have a PhD, but, trying to, everybody to be like sharing knowledge. So, kind of trying to disrupt the classroom, especially putting the chairs in circles. Like the students really like that. They got to see each other. And like I said, some of the material was really difficult. But the students said, because we always talk about safe spaces and, there's no such thing. But the students talked about it being a comfortable space that they could talk about stuff and have time to process things. So it was really amazing. I just want to really, really thank Melanie and Christina, and particularly Karina, who did all the ordering the soup and making sure the technology worked. Sometimes we couldn't, the internet was slow, or I couldn't connect the speakers. So it was a lot of work. So I just want to thank you three for hosting this. So anyways, well, thanks. And it was a great experiment, and the students really loved it. So if you're any teachers out there, I'd recommend doing this. So anyways, thank you, Marcy.
Thanks so much, June. And so it's now my great pleasure to introduce Kirsten Barnes. And I wanted to say what a lovely experience it was to have Kirsten agree to come and be part of this session tonight. Kirsten is many things. She is someone who's been very involved with the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society. She taught there for a number of years. But I wanted to say something about that she acted in faith in coming to do this, because she's actually been here working on her law degree and articling now, and though she is the principal and she's the advisor of GWES since her mother, Marjorie Mccrea, passed away in 2016, and I had never met Kirsten before, and I called and asked if she would be willing to come and speak about the work and reflect on its on what it meant and speak here with us, and she agreed. So I just wanted to say how appreciative I am of that leap that you took to come and do this, Kirsten. So now the more formal bio to say, Kirsten is an articles student at Callison and Hanna Indigenous Advocates. She recently graduated with a focus on social justice and a specialization in Aboriginal law from the Allard School of Law at UBC. Prior to attending law school, she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts with a major in First Nations Studies and a minor in Geography, and a Bachelor of Education from UNBC. Kirsten taught for a number of years and worked as a school administrator in her home community of Gitmax, and was the first BC recipient of an Inspire Guiding the Journey Educator Award in 2013. She taught for 9 years and ran the high school and post-secondary programs for 5 or 6 of those years at GWES. She currently provides administrative support to the school. She has also served multiple terms on the First Nations Schools Association Board of Directors and Executive. In the future, Kirsten hopes to focus her legal practice on Aboriginal title and rights, child welfare, and education reform and restorative justice. Kirsten is a member of the Gitksan Nation in northern BC. Come on up, Kirsten.
Cathy. Simgiget, Sigidam Hanak, Gubal Wasuk. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kirsten Barnes. As a grateful longtime visitor from the Gitksan Nation, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations for having us as grateful visitors on their territories this evening. I would also like to extend my gratitude to SFU and the very talented artist whose extraordinary work brought us together this evening, Ms. Cathy Busby. I'm very honored to have been asked to speak on behalf of the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society and the First Nations High School. Tonight is very bittersweet for me, as I'm speaking tonight in both my capacity as a longtime administrator and educator at GWES, but also as the daughter of my late mother, Chief Marjorie Mccrea. As Ms. Busby mentioned earlier, 5 of the We Call art installations have found a permanent home at our school. Each of the calls was carefully chosen by Cathy in collaboration with my family and the GWES staff to represent not only what the calls mean to us as a First Nation and as an educational institute, but also as permanent reminders of the many contributions that my mother made to our school, our communities, and our nation. Given that it should have been my mother speaking to you tonight, I've chosen to address the calls the way I imagine she would have done it, by being brutally honest, while also trying to be as optimistic as possible. When I first met Ms. Busby, she asked me what the calls mean to me. I'd never been asked what the calls mean to me before, so I was caught a little off guard, which is typically not a good thing when you're trying to build a career in the legal field, because one should never be unprepared to answer tough questions. However, in this case, I didn't have time to think about an appropriate answer and what it might sound like. So I answered honestly. I told her that the calls are just words. I realized how disheartening that probably sounded after I looked at Cathy. And so I immediately followed that up with what I meant to say is that they're just eloquently stated words on paper until they are followed by actions. And as history has shown us, Canada is very good at making lofty promises, but it is rare to see those promises fulfilled. Drafting well-meaning documents and expecting the words contained in those documents to magically solve centuries-old issues without any effort is foolish. And that's why I answered her the way that I answered her. Documents like the TRC's calls to action require effort and hard work to be fully realized. And more often than not, human beings are not always prepared or willing to do the hard work that meaningful change requires. And answering the 94 calls to action is challenging, to say the least. That said, I still believe it is possible, but only if we are willing to work together as an entire nation to heal what has been broken and to build a future rooted in the principles expressed by each of the 94 calls. My mother was one of those rare people who wasn't afraid to do the tough work. She was also the type of person who walked her talk and never took no for an answer. She was a true leader, and if she believed in something strongly enough, she would put in the effort to see it through. And the best example I can give you of that is how she opened the school at GWES. I guess what you would call it in legal terms is she committed a B&E. She went into the old school, broke open the door, and decided she was going to establish a school. And the reason that she did that was because we had such a high dropout rate of First Nation students in our community, and there was nowhere for them to go, and she needed somewhere for them to go. So, getting back to the calls, the calls at our school represent a starting point, a place to begin our journey on the road to reconciliation. They're constant reminders of what Indigenous and non-Indigenous people can achieve when they work toward a common goal. Every time someone walks through the doors at our school, from now until the faint fades and chips away, they will be reminded that we need to do better, and we need to work harder to heal from the trauma of our shared colonial history. Losing my mom has taught me many things, but mostly it's taught me that sometimes the only way to deal with and heal from something so traumatic and life-changing, like the scars left behind by residential schools, is to do the hard work. Sometimes our circumstances place what appear to be insurmountable obstacles in our way. And no matter how badly we want to just ignore it and place it in the past or put it on the shelf and forget about it, we have to find our way through those issues. Sometimes the only choice we have is to find our way through and to find the courage, the strength, and the resilience to do the hard work and face our obstacles head on. My mother applied that approach to every obstacle she faced during her short time on this earth, and I believe there is wisdom to be found in that approach as we attempt to heal. And as with all types of work worth doing, we must begin somewhere. And more often than not, the first step is the most difficult, because we often have to take the first step in the dark, lost, and alone. The good news in this situation is that the first step has already been taken for us. The TRC calls to action provide us with a place to begin and provide us with a roadmap to reconciliation. And artwork, like those included in the We Call installations, ensures that we never forget that those calls exist and that it's up to us to see them through. We have a roadmap. Now we must use it to reach our destination. And even if we don't reach that destination in our lifetime, we mustn't ever stop, because the time has come for Canada to be known and remembered as something other than a country divided by a tragic shared colonial history. In closing, I just wanted to share one last story with you. My mother used to always talk about things coming full circle, and to me, that's what the artwork does, because there's a little known fact about my school back home. It was actually the very first amalgamated school in British Columbia. And it came about because a chief in our territories gave up a piece of his land to the school district on the condition that First Nations and non-First Nations students could go to school together. And so that's a little piece of history from my community and the school. Thank you. Hamia.
So I'd like to ask everyone, all the participants to come up, including Gabe and Andy and Bonnie, and I'm going to introduce everybody. Sound good? So, Roxanne Charles was also going to join us this evening. She was one of the advisory group members. So who we have up here, just in broad strokes, and then I'll give you a little bit more information about them, are Andy Busby, who happens to be my brother, who teaches at the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society, and Bonnie Mccrea, also a teacher at GWES. And then we heard from June and Kirsten, and this is Gabe Hill, who was a member of the advisory committee here at SFU that we've mentioned a bit. So we also had Roxanne was a member. Roxanne Charles was the other member of the committee, and she couldn't make it here tonight. She's been very active in the occupation on Barnaby Mountain for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and she couldn't make it. But I wanted to extend appreciation for her work and for the other advisory committee members' work. So I'm going to say a little bit about Roxanne in her absence. So Roxanne Charles is a mixed media artist and contemporary storyteller. She is of Straight Salish and European descent and an active member of the Simiamu First Nation in Surrey. Roxanne is also an MFA candidate in SFU's School of Contemporary Arts. She's recently co-curated Ground Signals at the Surrey Art Gallery with Jordan Strom and her work was exhibited in Intangible, Memory and Innovation in Coast Salish Art at the Bill Reid Gallery. So thank you to Roxanne in her absence. I'd like to now just say a few words about Gabe. Gabrielle Rondell Hill is a Cree Métis artist and writer. Her sculptures and installations examine modes of land use, occupation, and ownership, as well as underground and black market economies. Her work has been exhibited at the TRU Gallery, Gallery Gachet, Grunt Gallery, Sunset Terrace, the Morrison Helen Balkan Art Gallery, Polygon Gallery, and Western Front. Hill received a BA in English and a BFA in Contemporary Art at SFU, as well as an MFA from the California College of Arts in Oakland. So, yes. And now I'm just going to say a little bit about Bonnie. So Bonnie Mccrea is a primary instructor in the adult dogwood program and has been teaching at GWES for over 12 years. She's involved in plant medicine gathering and preparation with a local Gitksan healer. She believes the ancient Gitksan have teachings that are important for all Northerners and is using this knowledge to heal and reconcile the pain of the past. She's an Omshwa, non-Indigenous, yet it's the Gitksan culture and people who have helped her through the most difficult challenges of her life. She has lived in Hazelton for over 40 years. Welcome, Bonnie. Andrew Busby is, as I said, my brother. He's also a teacher at GWES and has lived on the outskirts of South Hazelton for 27 years, where he and his wife, Beverly, have raised their family. At school, he teaches history, business administration courses, and whatever else needs to be taught. He's well known in the area for his many husky dogs that he takes out mushing with the locals all winter long. He's also known for recycling all kinds of meat and fish because those dogs are hungry.
Okay, so this is the part of the evening where we're going to try to have a bit more of a conversation amongst us and open it up to all of you out there. But I want to start by, I'm going to fill in two blanks that I feel are maybe there. And one is the formation of this advisory group and how that came to be. So what I want to say is that where I left off, which was on the note about wanting to do a kind of more internal reflection conversation within SFU Galleries, where we decided to start was within the community of people working within visual art and culture at SFU. And we started by I would guess maybe the way a lot of things happen quite organically, where you reach out to the people who are sort of closest to you or that you already have a conversation and a sense of allyship with. So we made an invitation to a current student in the School for Contemporary Arts, Visual Arts program, Roxanne Charles, to Gabe Hill, who is an alumni of that program, recently graduated, and also to June, who we had met recently through our research, who was also someone that was working at large within the university, within First Nation Studies, bringing a conversation around visual art, moving image art, literature, culture, but not necessarily within the conversation of contemporary art as we have it in the downtown campus. So this was a beginning conversation for us of bringing these people together to share their personal perspectives, not representational of any one constituency, but their personal experiences of working within the university as Indigenous students and teachers in reflection both of the pedagogy, the curriculum, relations between teachers and administration, staff, students, also their experience as collaborators with SFU Galleries, with our programming, people who are familiar with it, with our outreach, our events and exhibitions. And so we had basically a kind of open format conversation over 2 sessions, so a lot of those conversations have continued personally. And actually I have some of the findings or the outcomes of that conversation that I kind of want to point out because I think some of the key points are really important. I don't know if right now is the exact right time to do it, but I will get back to it. But really what I want to say about it is maybe to Kirsten's really important point, is that there's a beginning for all of us here who are at the front of the room, and there's a beginning of a conversation, and maybe part of the reason why I decided to reach back in time and point to another conversation that I had started 2 years ago was the type of ongoing unfolding, unfurling work that is done between people and communities. And so I very much think that the types of conversations that we started in the advisory group that was convened and incited by this project, once the project closes, will continue to happen within the galleries and within the university. So that's just a bit of an introduction to that. And I actually would like, Cathy, just before we go around, to say a little bit about why the Gitksan Wet'suwet'en Education Society, and what was the inciting reason for having decided to work with that organization in tandem with this one.
Thanks, Amy. The way that this came about, as with many of all my work, really, it's a combination of opportunities coming together, and I did have the idea that it would be really interesting to do this project in a more rural setting, in a place that was quite different from a university setting or a university gallery setting. And I'm kind of, thinking, and then there's a Canada Council grant deadline coming up. Maybe I could, that always makes me think harder, and or more, in a more focused kind of way. And then as often happens too, I think sometimes what's right in front of your face is like, oh, maybe this is a good idea. And so I thought, well, I've been going up to Hazelton for 27 years since my brother and sister-in-law moved there. And there's this very interesting, I've always known and kind of been on the outskirts of, on the periphery of the very interesting Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations there. And then I contacted Casan, which is the people there who had a small gallery space, and said, I'm thinking about, suggested that I would do a sort of a sister work to this work there, and they weren't so keen. And so I told Andy, they weren't so keen. And then it was like, what about at GWES? It just kind of came sort of organically like that. And then, so Andy was very enthusiastic, and then and then I said, well, could you pitch it to your staff and see how it goes? And that was when I was so honored to hear back that Marjorie, who was the head of the school, Marjorie Mccrea, was enthusiastic, and others have I got that right, Andy? Yeah, and others were enthusiastic to have it happen. And so then I felt like, yes, this is a place to do it. And so then I applied for the grant, and with the support of the Canada Council, was able to go ahead with it.
Okay. Hopefully that gives a little bit more foundation to it. So we just want to start by letting our guests who haven't had a chance to speak at the podium contribute anything that they wanted to, or ask a question of each other, and we'll start there. Pose a question to the project in general.
Man, I wrote out a speech for this, practiced it up on the subway down here and everything. Can I get on the podium and speak? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I put a lot of effort into this little yap session. I do, right here. Got to get in right order here. My name is Andrew Busby. I want to acknowledge and thank the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations whose land we are on. I want to thank you for inviting us. I want to thank SFU and Amy Kazimerchik in particular for arranging this event and going out of her way to include us. We are from a small school in a small town that plays a vital role in the lives of our students. Some of our students have burned all their educational bridges, and GWES is their last option. Some of our students weren't ready to learn earlier, and now's the time. Some students want to stay in their town while they pursue an education. And some students want to study in a relaxed, culturally aware, innovative setting. At my school, we're working on reconciliation from a different angle. We're providing opportunities to our youth to become educated and aware and connected. Kirsten mentioned that when our school was built in 1952, it was the first amalgamated school in the province. Our school is still welcoming the youth of our town and the surrounding villages and reserves. Our quest for making a lasting and transformative effect on the students requires us to involve our students in the process, not just the product. Our mission is to enable people to gain more control over their lives through education. We try to instill the idea that education is a lifelong process. What do these art installations mean to me? I appreciated the collaborative aspect during the design process. They display ideas that are important to me and my community in a bold and striking manner. They initiate conversations. I've used the UNDRIP articles, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, and the calls to action in many of the courses I teach. For me, they illustrate the evolution of thought in our country and the maturing of our nation. What does this installation mean to the students? They like seeing our school in the news. They see these messages daily. They were able to see the care and attention to detail during the installation process. And they are now more aware of the issues. Art can be beautiful or provocative, reassuring or insightful, or a narrative. It should always inspire us into thinking a different way. These works do that. Thanks for listening to me.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me up here and for inviting GWES staff to this. Again, as the others have done, I would like to acknowledge the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, thank you, that one, and the Squamish, yes, nations. I also would like to recognize the about 3 or 4 Gitksan houses that our school resides on, or who have fishing sites near to our school, which could make them responsible for the territory underneath our school. For those of you who are not aware, the Gitksan Nation houses are autonomous nations of their own, and I believe there's 52 houses, are there not, within the Gitksan Nation. Each nation is each house is an autonomous nation unto itself. It has external affairs. In ancient times, it had external affairs. It had governance structures. It had court, church, inheritance laws. And so these nations, these house nations rather than the Gitksan nations, are the ones we should be recognizing. What does action mean? I teach Indigenous Studies 11 and 12. So perhaps most of you don't understand that Indigenous youth generally have very little knowledge of what happened in the Indian residential schools. Their elders who are still alive are generally completely and absolutely silent about what happened. They know there's pain there. They're not stupid. For 3 years now, our school, and it was approved initially by, well, maybe it's more like 4 years, Kirsten. It was approved by Marjorie Mccrea, that 2 Indian residential school survivors come every year, once a year, and spend the entire afternoon speaking to the students about their experience. These are 2 very courageous people. One is Gitksan and one is, not sure what Christine is. She's, Lakapamu or someone down south. I apologize. The first time they came, I, as an Amishwa, a non-Gitsan person, cried. The tears ran down my face for 2 hours. It is brutal. It is raw. It is so much pain that you can't even begin to imagine the pain these people have gone through. It is cultural genocide. It is spirit genocide. How these people got their souls back, I don't know, but they both did. That is the action. If you have not sat down and listened to a person who was a survivor, a person who has come out of the pain of alcohol or drugs or whatever else they have done to cover up their pain, then I tell you, you must sit down if you want to move forward in reconciliation. If you have not heard someone speak, then you must do it. It will change you forever.
I'd like to start by just thanking everybody who's here today and for coming up and speaking at this event, for putting the effort in, and everybody who came today. Thank you for your words. And I was invited to be on the SFU advisory panel, on this issue, which is in some ways ironic because I've been pretty vocal, a pretty vocal opponent of a lot of discourse around reconciliation, but I do continue to end up sitting on panels or being invited in some way, which I think is pretty funny and ironic. But I think that for me, it's been, my family did survive residential school, and for me, it's been a difficult thing to deal with a lot of the discourse that, can tend to reduce experiences of colonization to, a limited period of your life when you're in residential school. When you exit, it goes on. It began much earlier and will go on for a long time. And I think that what's great about this particular process and Cathy's work and the work of the advisory board which is totally connected, is that Cathy's work is first of all about action, which is really meaningful to me. And it's also about drawing attention not just to emotional healing that needs to happen, but also to issues of land that have been brought up many times today, which for me is very central because, for many reasons, but first off, reconciliation, as a couple scholars who've researched the issue have shown, is that reconciliation in many ways was used by the government to divert attention after the Oka crisis from an uprising of Indigenous people who were talking about land. So when land is the issue, it's sometimes easy to divert attention to a story that's perhaps easier to, as Stephen Harper said, turn the page on, right? To be able to get past something without giving up, what's at the bottom of everything, which is land. So one thing that I think has been great about this process is to bring in issues of, like you said, nation-to-nation negotiation, to stand here, when we stand here and we acknowledge that we are uninvited guests on this territory, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territory, that those are words that we all speak, that it's happened in my lifetime that it's become a regular thing for non-Indigenous people to say that. And to me, that's really heartening, because to me, that's the first step in building those relationships. And the words are the first step in your actions, acknowledging that this is stolen land. And so how do you address that? In addition, I also believe that it's super important to improve Indigenous students' experiences at school. And so that is something that this project is also undertaken to do, which I think is heartening and completely linked to me to issues of land and to issues of acknowledging the process of colonization, not just in words, but through actions. And so thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you everybody on the panel for coming today. It sounds like everybody's doing really important work, and I'm really heartened to hear that.
Melanie has a microphone. Sorry, we'll clap for you first, Kate. Melanie has a microphone. Does anybody in the audience want to ask anybody on the panel a question?
I would still like to hear more about the advocacy or the group that Gabe is a part of, because I think that it's really that one of the things that Cathy's project really draws out the complexity of is like that this is not the work. The work is the other stuff that happens, that it provokes, or the calls to action, perhaps the work itself, like these conversations about reconciliation or decolonization or whatever, mean nothing without action. So I would love to hear more about the conversations that happened behind the scenes or in the context of the banners that you produced, and especially within the context of the university, to understand some of the interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary synergies maybe that were happening, because I imagine that there are so many different ways to approach what it means to address the complexity of this history and these calls.
Maybe I can show you some images of, let me just think. Of course, conversation isn't so, doesn't come up in bullet points. So I'm going to show you something that's not really a register of the nuance and the debate, and also the disagreement. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people at the table, and I wouldn't say by any stretch of the imagination all of our perspectives were, totally aligned. But one thing that was really important for me was thinking about this initial set of meetings, thinking about speech acts as a kind of action, and like both Bonnie was talking about what it's like to the power of action, of having people speak their stories and also having to be witness to that, and the different types of speech acts that we've been talking about, that this is a form of, the more you do it, Gabe's talking about the acknowledgements that we now come to say, that as soon as you put that action with your body and your breath out into the world, there's something that becomes enacted that then I think the mind has to start following through on. And so basically at the end of our sessions, I solidified some of the ideas into 4 points, which are really right now in a way this kind of create a stepping stone for us to move forward as the galleries and to discuss further. But I'm also kind of curious, once you guys read these, how these resonate for some of the things GWES is thinking about in terms of their school. Probably very different in a way because of the constituency and the makeup of the school. But the first big one that we talked about was I don't know if the lighting now is going to support this, but we talked a lot about the address the participation of Indigenous people in SFU's gallery SFU gallery structure and operations. And I won't read these in totality, but everything from the diversity and representation within the demographics of the staff, different advisory committees, the artists we support, speakers, volunteers, interns, co-ops, and looking at the active participation of Indigenous people within the actual operations of the gallery, as well as looking at our economic policies. How are people supported? Who is supported with what monies? How are the unique economic needs of individuals acknowledged, including how flexible are payment structures, and what are the breadth of ways artists can be supported financially and with resources and assistance. Also looking closer at the structure, timescales, and formats of exhibitions and events, and thinking about how these types of structural formations also affect who can participate and who feels welcome and who feels like they are part of the program. Our values and methods for collaborating with community partners, and structures of hospitality. I thought it was really important, June's contribution around her thoughts on kitchen table pedagogy and just what does the classroom look like and feel like, and how are people brought together. And I think our excitement around our conversation about meeting with June really led directly into this invitation to collaborate on hosting this class in the gallery, and also thinking about, what does a class look like in a gallery that might look different if it's in an academic classroom. So that was a really big one, important one. The second one was developing program to support and engage SFU Indigenous students and faculty. And this had a lot to do with putting Indigenous people basically at the foundation of inaugurating programming, facilitating it, and really leading from where students and faculty are at in terms of what they want and what they need in programming. And I think a huge part of this process for us was physically going out throughout the school and just meeting people. I mean, these massive institutions, you have no idea who the faculty are or where the students are located. Indigenous students are, spread out throughout many, many departments and disciplines. And so it was just a huge step, I think, in the process of action to just start getting out and meeting with people and making those connections and making those really open invitations that there's an open door and that we can start conversations and people can propose ideas. And to do that, it also, I think, reflects back on the first point to the end of when you start opening the door to people to make suggestions or to make invitations or to make proposals, that then you also have to think about what the structural organization is that's going to facilitate those options and what those are going to look like. The third one was around developing programming to support and engage Indigenous communities outside of SFU, and I thought this was really a really meaningful conversation around methodologies and approaches to doing forms of outreach. Actually, I liked too that in our conversations we talked a lot about in-reach, and not so much about this idea that you have to pull people into the galleries or into your program, but that you actually leave the gallery or the institution altogether and go to where people are at, and to meet people on different grounds than the institutional space, which I thought was really meaningful conversation that continued. And then, of course, within the university, talking about visual art presentation, exhibition, and programming. Everybody acknowledged in the room that that had to coincide with a conversation with the curriculum and the pedagogical apparatus. So that there was enthusiasm to initiate a conversation with the School for Contemporary Arts and the larger FCAT faculty to discuss curriculum and ways of pedagogical methodologies that could be in dialogue with what happens with the galleries, because we're not an academic department. We're part of external affairs. And we actually did sort of initiate a beginning to this step, which was to start a series of sort of internal conversations to expand the advisory to include School for Contemporary Arts faculty through a series of conversations between students and faculty that had already been doing collaborative work together, but the timing of it did not fit so well with the academic calendar. So we're going to regroup on that and reorganize for next year. But these are some of the four kind of main ideas that were solidified. I think that people had some strong backing behind in the meetings. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit, Cheyenne, but. Pretty thorough. Yeah. Does anybody else have a question or want to expand upon that or anything anybody said? I'd really like to ask Kirsten a question. And actually, any of you guys at the school can answer this. It's a two-part question. First is I'm curious what the educational goals are of your school, and what are some of the most important facets of that, and what you see people taking away from their experience at GWES. And I'm curious to know, in terms of this collaboration with Cathy, if arts education or cultural production is an important part of that. Oh, you can take James. Sure. Close.
Is it on? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, our school is very unique because when it was first established, it was established with the intention of, like I said, addressing the dropout rate in our area. But since that time, it's been expanded to include early childhood education. So we have a daycare right on site, all the way through to post-secondary education. So it's basically what my mom used to call a one-stop shop. And in addition to that, I think a big part of our school is the art program. Among a number of the programs that my mother started was one called Youth Helping Youth. And the idea was to connect our local carvers and artists with youth, with Gitksan and Wet'suwet'en youth who wanted to be artists themselves, but they never had the courage or the support to go and learn the craft. And so what we did is we started the Youth Helping Youth program, and we brought in, I don't like to use the term at-risk youth any longer, but basically youth that they needed someone there, they needed mentorship. And they found that mentorship through art. And what they would do is they would work on projects with our master carvers and our artists, our in-house carvers. And they would create different pieces of artwork that they would sell in order to fundraise for different types of activities and stuff that they couldn't normally do. So we have that. In addition to that, one of the biggest things I feel that our school does differently is we create relationships with the students. And so the students don't come through the door feeling like they're coming into an institution. They come into our school and they feel safe. They come in, maybe, it might be the only place that they're going to have breakfast or lunch that day. And so part of that was, part of the goal of the school was to provide that type of an atmosphere for the students. And we have developed those relationships, and many of our students have actually gone on to do incredible things. I have a handful of students that still contact me almost on a daily basis. I'm not joking, via text message and stuff like that to tell me what they're up to. And I recently had 2 students that came to us to do the Dogwood program, graduate from UNBC with their bachelor's degrees. And one of them is now working full-time in Terrace at a school. He's working with kids in elementary school. And then another one is working for the Kids List Band. And so those are 2 success stories. In addition to that, Cathy had mentioned at the start, we also used to have the Youth Healing Lodge, which was a program created for incarcerated youth. And we would work with parole officers all over the province, and they would send us boys that were actually incarcerated. And they would come and they would finish out their sentences with us in kind of like a group home environment. And the idea was a restorative justice approach to incarceration. And it was a very successful program. Very few of our boys that came through the program ever reoffended. And a number of them have done really great things as well. I know one of them is currently at BCIT. And then another one went on to go to Langara College. And people are often curious about why they came from down here, but we actually took a lot of boys from the Barnaby Youth Corrections. And I think another unique thing about our school is and this relates back to the calls to action, is that you'd be probably amazed to see how many of our faculty are actually non-Native. And we love them, and I think they love us. Basically, we call them should-have-beens, because they should have been Gitksan, but they weren't fortunate enough. But yeah, they're with us for life, I think. I think so, yeah.
Well, until I retire, I'm staying for life.
But yeah, so I think part of that is our school, through education, we are building those bridges between the Gitksan population and the non-native population in our territories. And in addition to having non-native teachers, we do also accept like non-native students to our school as well. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Just want to add anything?
If it wasn't so far away and the flights weren't so expensive, it would have been amazing to actually get to spend a couple of months sharing stories about the ways that you work, and I'm thinking about those 4 points, and I'm thinking about the ways that I'm sure in your community you're thinking about the relationship between the school, the pedagogy, and community participation, the ways that students are active in determining their education, and the ways in which art and culture is proliferated through. It would have been probably totally amazing to get to talk to all of you through all of our meetings. Yeah.
Okay, well, you're all invited up to Hazelton. Come and do a tour of our school. We're very aware of racism, and we are working to, if not defeat it, at least try and negate some of it. It's hard, and as a newcomer to my community, I'm happy in my own skin. It's not. I don't want to try and adopt become a. I don't want to become a Gitksan person. I appreciate the Gitksan Nation and what it stands for, and what I can learn from what's there and what was there in the past. But I'm driven towards the future. I'm driving towards the future. And I want to take my students with me. And like I said, we work so hard to try and make race a non-issue in our the way we teach the students. So it's sort of a schizophrenic thing, because we're trying to defeat racism, yet we're trying to celebrate a unique culture that I'm not part. I'm on the periphery of. I'm not part of it. I'm studying it and I'm trying to understand it. But yeah, that's. Sorry, I didn't finish that too well. But that's the goal of our school. Racism has caused so many problems in our community that. If we can tone it down, if we could get rid of it altogether, that would be great. If we can tone it down so that we can all live together, then that's one of our goals. So.
Okay, we could keep talking, but I'm going to close it because we promised you that we would serve you food and drinks in the other room. There is a reception set up in the Teck Gallery, so please join us for that. And just before I'm going to switch again to this. I'm not sure why exactly, but we do have some gifts. Cathy and I have put together some gifts for our guests to thank you so much for your contribution to Cathy's project over a whole year, and to your time tonight, and to really your care and thought and concentration on working through this project in your own ways. So thank you so much, and Cathy will hand them out. And I also very much want to thank my team at SFU Galleries, Melanie O'Brien, Karina Irvin, Christina Headland, Cassidy Miller, and Wei Yi Chang for their ongoing, focused, and caring support of this project. So thank you very much. You can just give them up.
Right on, SFU t-shirt.
It's a tiny tee. Oh, it's a crop top. And we have one for Roxanne, who may join us in the reception after she's done. And I have one last gift, which is for Cathy, from me in specific. Thank you for all of your care and attention and time this year, and for working with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.